Welcome to Super Athlete Radio, where we help listeners like you optimize your health, performance, mindset, and longevity. Let's do this. Really excited to have my friend Jon Eisenman, a sports media specialist on Super Athlete Radio today. Jon has spent basically his whole career in the elite high school and middle school basketball scene here in the United States. And in this episode, we really go into what he's seen really works for parents and coaches who want to develop elite athletes, what doesn't work, how to best go through and navigate middle school as an elite athlete, and how to best navigate high school as an elite athlete. He has a really unique, in-depth perspective as someone who's seen hundreds, if not thousands, of elite, high-level high school basketball games over the past 7 years. Really excited to share this episode with you. Let's get into it. Jon, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing well, Chase. How about you?
Doing fantastic. Just told me that you're working on a new gig, which is really exciting. But I'd love to start with just kind of your origin story, where you grew up, and how'd you get to where you are now?
So I was born and raised here in Miami. Was always a basketball fan and knew that I wanted to work in basketball. Played travel basketball up until my freshman year of high school. And my priorities were a little mixed up back then, so kind of put sports aside and decided to be just a typical high school student and worked in high school. And when I got into college, my goal was to find a way to work within basketball. Went to Temple in Philadelphia, graduated with a degree in media studies and production in 2014, and from there I kind of kickstarted my basketball career. Worked as an intern for Hoop Group, which is a huge basketball conglomerate, mostly on the skill and development side and event side, but they also do some recruiting and some digital work as well, which is where I kind of got my foot in the door. So I worked at Hoop Group for about a year as an intern before moving to Houston and kickstarting my basketball career, doing some work for John Lucas, a company called Hoop Mixtape on the video side. And that's kind of how it started. I had never picked up a camera up until this point and needed to pay the bills. So found a couple gigs that involved a camera and just picked it up, gave it a shot, and my passion for the game kind of took over at that point, where I knew that after the hard work in college and interning at Hoop Group, that I wanted to stay in basketball long term.
Yeah. And then real quick, how did you describe growing up in Miami?
It's not your typical childhood. Very fast paced. The culture down here it's amazing in reference to, the Hispanic culture and what the city has to offer. But it's a wonderful and beautiful place. Like I said, childhood is kind of fast paced and, there's a bunch of distractions, but overall, it was an unbelievable childhood. Still am friends with most of my buddies I grew up with, and
God bless.
Absolutely. And obviously being down here in sunny South Florida pretty much my entire life, there's not much, to complain about.
And then how would you, being a professional in the space now, how would you kind of view the youth sports scene for South Florida?
I think down here, youth sports has always been a predominant scene, especially within our youth sports space, specifically football. I myself played football growing up. The second you're old enough, you're thrown pads into football and kind of are told to get out there.
Yeah.
It's the South Florida culture. But I do think basketball has always kind of taken a step back. I think over the years, the last 8 to 10 years, I think the development of our basketball space here in specifically Miami has grown tremendously, where it was once not a recruitable area and has now become a more recruitable area where kids are starting to take the sport a little more seriously, and there's more opportunity for the student athlete.
And then what do you think has caused that advancement?
I just think digital media has played a large role into it. The rumor always was that it was hard to get college coaches down here to watch basketball talent, just because we are a football state, specifically a football county, where it's, to get a coach to come at the bottom of the map to watch one or two athletes that may be at their level is not as convenient as going to an area where you can watch 20 to 30 athletes at your level. So I think that social media and digital media has played a part to the growth of youth basketball in Miami and South Florida. But yeah, I think that would probably be the biggest token.
And then did you go down to Houston specifically to work with John Lucas?
No, so my best friend, Colin Campbell, who coaches at FIU,
Okay.
both of our goal was to try to figure out how to work in basketball. He played Division III basketball at a school in New York called Manhattanville. And I kind of rode his coattail in the beginning because I didn't know how to maneuver in the college basketball space, or at least in the professional basketball space. And I was at Hoop Group feeling like I could get more out of my opportunity there. And he had just met the owner of Hoop Mixtape, Nils Wagner, who is it's a large video and digital media platform that lives on the internet. I think there's millions of followers among several different platforms. He had met the gentleman, my buddy Colin had met the gentleman who owns it, and they was looking for videographers. So he was, hey, I know you're not, getting enough out of your internship. You should think about moving to Houston when you graduate. And from one day to another, I was living with my grandmother at the time and was, hey, like, I've got this opportunity. I'm packing up all my stuff and I'm heading to Houston.
Yeah.
So drove from Philly to Houston. Initially it was to figure out, learn how to use a camera, pick up jobs for money, and then while I, network and figure out what my next move is. And through that, developed a relationship with John Lucas, where I was working his Lucas camps and Lucas labs, which were his training sessions.
Okay.
Doing mostly video work for him.
Okay.
And then for another company called Take My Talent, which were the guys who kind of introduced me to John and taught me how to really work a camera and editing software.
And then in terms of what Lucas was doing, this was pros, or is this?
So it's actually every level.
Okay.
Lucas Lab, John Lucas's training sessions was actually the first time that I saw younger athletes in elite skill drills. He had athletes elementary school, anywhere from 1st to 5th grade, all the way up to pro athletes. One that I saw quite a bit, not Jared Vanderbilt. Jared was there occasionally. God, I forget the name. Jared Sullinger was a big John Lucas guy. So you would have,
He's a big guy, right?
Yeah, big guy. Played at Ohio State. I think he played for the Celtics for a handful of years. Was a huge athlete at Ohio State. He was training in Lucas Lab with a group of athletes ranging from maybe 8 years old to teenagers to early 20s. So the Lucas Lab sessions were pretty much were kids from all ages working on elite drills, which you don't really see youth athletes, working at elite drills often.
Okay, there's a couple things I'm really excited to get into here. One is that, do you feel like the digital expansion with digital media for basketball has helped it become more global? Would you agree?
Absolutely. I think just for the student athlete alone, just the exposure that they get from social media, posting their highlights, posting offers, or just posting any skill work that they do, the exposure you get from that single post could change your life. I mean, there's kids who are unrecruitable, or not necessarily unrecruitable, but aren't recruited, who end up, posting something on Twitter, tagging some coaches, and end up getting an academic scholarship or athletic scholarship to participate in college sports or to further their education through the vehicle of basketball.
And then how would you recommend let's say 14-year-old basketball player, how would you recommend that they use social media?
It's a great question. I actually get asked that often, because social media can be a great tool, but it can also be a tool that hinders your progress and your recruitability. I think for a 14-year-old who's on social media, who's trying to gain exposure to their game to increase their chances of playing at the next level, I think you got to treat it as a professional would treat it, where it's, double checking grammar, making sure you're not posting things that are going to affect, how someone views you. Don't post anything that'll get you in trouble, but feel free to post highlights and anything that will highlight your game to increase the chances of coaches reaching out, or even being able to watch film from a year prior and being able to see what you've improved on or what you need to work on. I think, those are a couple aspects that kids can use, a 14-year-old can use to use social media correctly. But, it's one of those where it all depends on the athlete and how serious they take it.
Yeah, I think that's super valuable. And then how long did you stay with Hoop Group and John Lucas?
So I worked with Hoop Group back in 2013. I graduated 2014. So I think I worked Hoop Group for about a year before graduating. I graduated, then moved to Houston. I want to say this was like February of 2015. So I was in Houston for about a year. So I was working with John, I want to say give or take about 9 months, while working a radio job to help pay the bills as well. And then Hoop Group, I went back. So after my year at Hoop Group from 2013 to 2014, I went back in 2017 in between jobs before I got the Slam Magazine job in 2017.
And then real quick, I want to touch base on the Hoop Group. What are your thoughts now looking back on younger kids doing the elite level skill? I'm guessing it's probably just the coach and the culture dictates whether that's going to be effective. But do you have any thoughts on? Yeah, and it sounds like Lucas had it down.
Yeah, I mean, there's two arguments to it. You and I have spoke before about how I genuinely feel it's important for a kid to be a kid, especially leading into high school. So like the middle school and elementary school athlete, I think it's important where they still treat the game as a game and not necessarily a profession. There's going to be a kid. There's always kids who are going to be more elite for their age than others. And a lot of that is due to skill work and skill training. Now more than ever, you see 7, 8-year-olds, training with pro trainers in hopes that betters their chances of playing at the next level and increasing their opportunity and chances to play in the NBA. I think it could be beneficial if you're teaching drills that are going to translate at each level that the athlete is in. I think that's great, but I also think it's a little ridiculous to have your 7-year-old, 8-year-old train with pros, or at least at that high level. Not to say that I think it could be very beneficial progress, but a lot of the work that a athlete's putting in elementary school, middle school doesn't always translate to high school and even then to college or the pros.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. As we were talking about before, so like with my two boys, I was huge on them doing as many different sports and activities as possible. And that's for like two reasons. One, from like a sports performance perspective, having them do all different types of movements, I mean, it's just good athletically. But two, just to find what, no one's really going to be super elite unless they really want it. So finding what that thing is for them. But I think it's really interesting, something I wanted to talk about here was your thoughts on I think it's the last 4 NBA MVPs have been international. And do you feel like the high school basketball scene 2023, do you feel like it's better or worse compared to like 2016?
In regards to opportunity or level?
Level.
Oof. That's a great question. The 2023 class, the senior class, isn't as talented as the 2024 class,
okay,
but definitely more talented than the 2022 class.
Okay.
So this 2023 senior class is impressive. I will say I've seen classes that are even more impressive, but I've also seen classes that aren't as skilled. So perfect example, I think my first year of trying to work in basketball full time, my first year in Houston, that senior class was absolutely loaded. Jason Tatum, Darren Scott, Trae Young, Billy Preston, Harry Giles. Like, we're talking a very loaded senior class that we don't always get that lucky. This 2024 class is also very impressive, where you have the Boozer twins, or excuse me, they may be 2025. You have the Boozer twins, where one of them is guaranteed to be the number 1 or number 2 pick in the draft in 3 years from now. And then you also have the kid at Montverde, Cooper Flagg, who I believe he was a 2025 kid who just reclassed the 2024 class.
So he moved up a year?
He moved up a year.
Interesting.
To better his chances not necessarily better his chances, he's a generational talent. Yeah. This kid, Cooper Flagg, is already being spoken about as if he's, number 1 pick in the draft one day. Where, I forgot where I was going.
This is really interesting because just like, what I find really interesting with this is So these guys are ready potentially to go to the NBA, but the way the NBA is set up now, like with the Boozer twin or a Cooper Flag, most 19-year-olds coming in the NBA, like it's kind of spoken about now, are not ready. So it's going to be a few years.
Well, it depends, really. It depends on the athlete. For years now, it was actually, the rumor was 2023. It's too late now. Who knows if it'll get passed, but I think the probability of this happening is definitely higher now with a bunch of different circumstances. But there was always a rumor that by 2023, college, where a student athlete wasn't going to have to go to college to be eligible for the NBA draft. So they were trying to get rid of that one and done rule. Arguably, or I don't know exactly why, but I can argue that it's because of the NIL money that's coming in, and I can argue that kids are now going pro from high school to, international opportunities, or even G League or overtime elite, where kids are bypassing that 1 year of college, where really it's kind of irrelevant. Obviously back then I'm sure it was more of a play on college basketball, making sure the athletes stayed within college. But now that there's other opportunities and kids don't have to do the 1 year in college, that there was a rumor that they were going to get rid of the one and done rule, where kids were going to be eligible out of high school.
Yeah, I always believed the former NBA commissioner, David Stern, his kind of biggest thing, he just didn't want like GMs and scouts in high school gyms. Yeah. People thought it was like a conspiracy and things like that, but that makes some sense to me.
I could tell you from firsthand experience that, you go to a USA basketball trial over at the USA basketball campus in Colorado Springs, and it's open for NBA scouts to join. So you'll have 20 high major Division I programs in there mixed in with, a Golden State Warriors scout, with a Miami Heat scout, and you have 50 people who are evaluating talent within one room. That's pretty surreal.
And USA basketball starts 15U?
15U, I believe, maybe even 14U. But they start trials over in Colorado Spring. I want to say it's throughout the entire year. I know that there was a couple that just happened about a month ago over at the Colorado Springs campus, and they send 20, give or take, of 20 student athletes in each class to work out and try out for the national team.
And then, what are your thoughts with the globally being the best of the best? And do you feel just the game has gotten global, and that's why there's just a lot of people around the world? That's why, and they've come into the NBA now, and that's why they're, got MVP the last 4 years, Embiid and Jokic and Giannis? Or do you feel like there's some development that's happening, potentially that's happening better other places than what you've seen in the United States?
There's a couple different factors. So I do think that there's less distractions overseas. So I think that the athlete is going to be an easier process. Obviously, I've never lived overseas, nor have I experienced much of the space overseas. So this is all just my perspective. But I could see an athlete growing up in, somewhere in Europe, having a little less distractions as a high elite athlete here in the United States. I think that plays a little bit of a role.
And then what do you think some of those distractions are here?
Just being a teenager, wants the girls, the nightlife, the
grown men reaching out.
Yeah, you have a bunch of people in your corner. Who can you trust? There's people, there's going to be people in your corner who have an agenda. It's about navigating that. And then, there's also just the day-to-day to life. Life throws you curveballs, and it's about, how you adjust and how you push forward. And some kids are mentally able to, go through tough times, or at least you just continue to live. And sometimes the personal stuff can overtake, an athlete's life, which is obviously an hindrance in their progress.
And then in terms of middle school, what do you recommend as best practices for coaches and or parents watching this who, their kids are really interested in basketball, and just your perspective with what you've seen with your work with, made hoops and things like that? What do you feel like is a best practice?
I think it's important to just let your kid be a kid. Figure out if this is something that they really want to take seriously in high school, when it becomes more serious. Not that middle school basketball isn't serious. It's now a platform that college coaches are recruiting on, but obviously it becomes a little more, of a realistic opportunity in high school, chasing your dreams to play at the next level. Trying to think. Repeat your question one more time, if you.
Yeah, you mentioned LeBron beforehand.
So that was the next thing I wanted to talk about in regards to, what a kid should be doing. Obviously, letting him play, letting him be a kid, not to focus on some of the skill set, work, to just let them enjoy the game, fall in love with it. Skill, diving into skill work occasionally could be a great thing. It's also something that's not going to make or break your student athlete, in middle school. It will help. I think it will. But it's also something that you could do down the line, and there won't be much of a gap in regards to where your athlete is and someone else's child. But we were speaking before this where, the example about LeBron not having his kids do a bunch of drill work until they were in high school that's something that I heard down the line, and I always find that incredibly interesting, where you have arguably the best player to ever touch a basketball telling his kids or instructing his kids not to focus on as much skill work and weightlifting in middle school as, just going out and enjoying the game, where you'll see helicopter dads on the sideline berating their kid for, turning over the ball or, making a mistake and then talking about putting him in practice where he's, waking up at 5 a.m. as a seven-year-old, training with adults.
Yeah.
It's one of those. I do think, just to backtrack a bit, I do think the skill work is huge. I think it could be very beneficial to the progress of your athlete, but it's something that at the middle school age is okay if you don't do. As long as your athlete's in love with the game and wants to take it seriously, there's always, if you want to get good at something, you put in the time and effort. Yeah. And I think being a kid and learning how to love the game before you start deciding whether you want to put the time and effort into perfecting your craft, I think that's more important at the middle school age.
Yeah, I agree, because again, I just believe that in terms of injury prevention and then just having kids move as many different ways as possible I think is huge. But also, if the kid really wants it, I think, you potentially want to let him
100%.
Or her lead on that. But I just think the timelines are so interesting because so they get into high school where it becomes very serious. And one of the things that I love that happens in Europe that I think is advantageous for them, which Luka is celebrated for, is that playing with grown men, consistently, good grown men, at like 15 and 16, which I think is really advantageous compared to potentially what happens over here.
I actually think if you're talking about how to get your middle school athlete better, I think that's a perfect example. Have them play against grown men or players who are taking it seriously so that they're, able to gel with them and learn. It's watching film or just playing with the older athlete. You learn so much from that, where it could be very beneficial into skill work and learning how to, move the ball certain ways and position yourself. I think that's almost as beneficial as skill work. Yeah. And like my previous job, I wanted to make sure I made Hoops. I was the director of digital media over there, and it's a predominantly middle school platform dedicated for the elite of the elite. So I wanted to make sure to say that a lot of those athletes who are at the top 8th grade athlete, they are doing a lot of skill work. So that's the other end of the argument, where I do believe it's important where a kid is a kid in middle school, but then you have the student athlete who's being recruited by high major programs because of the skill work that he's put in middle school. Granted, some of those athletes are 6'5" at 12, 13 years old, which helps. But there's not many 6'5", 12-year-olds just walking around. But just wanted to make sure that I highlighted that some of those athletes are doing the pro skill workouts where they're waking up at 5, they're working out in the middle of the day, and then they're working out in the evening again. Some of it's skill work, some of it's just practice. But, if you want to be that athlete, it's going to require that at the middle school level as well.
Okay. And then what did you do at Slam?
So at Slam, I was a content creator and social media manager.
Okay.
So it was actually 3 of us we started that Slam High School page. So on social media, it's at slam_HS. I think the first like 10 posts on the platform were actually mine, covering South Florida talent. This was back in 2017, I think I got hired in November of 2017 at Slam. And I think in December, the first big event that was happening post getting hired or having our department created was Hoop Hall in Miami, which is an event that's no longer thrown, but Montverde was there, and they had like Silvio De Soto. They had some big names, Bruno Fernando. And then for South Florida, you had Jamal Mashburn Jr., who played at Gulliver with Tony Sanders, who's I think playing at Notre Dame still. And Jamal Mashburn Jr., obviously his dad is senior and plays at, I want to say, New Mexico State.
Yeah, he followed Rick Pitino's son.
Yeah, so he, I went to go watch him, and then U School, which at the time had Scotty Barnes, Vernon Carey, Drew Drennan, and Trey Dooms. Zay Flowers, who just got drafted by the Baltimore Ravens. So I went to Hoop Hall and created like 4 or 5, 6 maybe pieces of content, and those were the first pieces of content on that Slam High School page.
And those were just jump cuts?
Jump cuts, just raw highlights,
Yeah.
where I would go just film the game, take the best, 15 seconds to 45 seconds of highlights, compile them into one file, and move them around so that the better highlights were in the front, and that's kind of how Slam High School started.
Yeah, and how many followers does that have now?
Well over 1 million.
Yeah.
I think, so I left right as the pandemic was unfolding. So I think I left maybe March of 2020. By that point, I think we had hit 1 million followers.
Okay.
So in the 2.5 years that I was there, as a full-time employee, we gained 1 million followers, which was pretty unheard of in regards to growth, but also pretty incredible to see unfold and kind of see all the hard work kind of pay off.
And then does Slam do anything in terms of revenue besides the magazine?
Their biggest revenue stream, I want to say, is advertisement.
Okay.
So I know that like their Slam Kicks page, they have deals with shoe brands that are bringing in advertising money to advertise the product that the shoe brands want to advertise. They do some work with Under Armour on the youth basketball side as well as their like main media partner. I think Slam also does stuff with like McDonald's All-American and then NBA, obviously. But yeah, I think their biggest moneymaker outside of the magazine is advertisement, clothing. I think their clothing brand does very well. And then, just partnerships. I think that brings in a bunch of revenue for them.
And then where did you go after Slam?
So after Slam, the pandemic hit, was, trying to figure out what to do, just like everybody else who worked in sports. And I want to say by August of that year, I had heard from Paragon Marketing, Rashid Ghazi, my old boss, who is a huge player in the youth sports space. Rosh Ghazi is actually the guy who puts youth sports on ESPN. So if you've ever watched a high school basketball game, football game, baseball game, girls volleyball on ESPN Network, it's through a company called Paragon Marketing, where Rashid Ghazi is one of the partners there. He runs an ESPN account where ESPN hires him and his company to put on live broadcast of the games, as well as to highlight and market the student athlete.
Yeah.
So I got hired by Paragon Marketing in 2020, coming out of the pandemic, where one of my first jobs with them was to cover Top Flight Invitational in Las Vegas. That is typically the more elite preseason event in the high school space.
Okay.
Bronny, LaMelo, I think those kind of athletes end up playing in this event. But yeah, I started after Slam, got hired in August of 2020 or September of 2020 to work for Paragon as an ESPN content creator and media manager. And I was there for about 2.5 years, or maybe 2 years before taking the job over at Made Hoops.
And then any highlights from ESPN?
Yeah, I mean, we did football too,
Okay.
which was my first taste of doing football. There's a documentary that's going to be releasing, I want to say on HBO, about this program named Bishop Sycamore.
Okay.
Where it was a gentleman who kind of created a fake school to play on national television versus IMG.
Okay.
And you guys will be hearing about that story pretty soon, but we unfortunately were part of the team that helped put that together.
Did he bring students in and create the school, or was it just completely fabricated?
Your typical fabricated school where you have someone who is telling the parent that their school is accredited, so they're going to be receiving credits while, living a college basketball schedule where, your day-to-day is surrounded by basketball and everything else is secondary. It's one of those.
Do you feel like that can work?
I think it can. There's several programs, the IMGs, the Montverts, where it's an accredited academic program. In fact, a very high academic program, where the student is focused on their sport while going through a rigorous academic schedule as well. Kind of getting them ready for that next step. So do I think it works and do I think it can work? Absolutely. It has to be legitimate. And doing your research is important. But that is one thing on the ESPN side that is fascinating to talk about because it's going to be a household conversation here in the next, year or so. But in regards to a couple good things that happened at ESPN, I think I spent my second year there, I spent half my year following around Bronny James, LeBron's oldest son, which that was exciting. Followed around.
That was mostly Southern California?
So no, it was actually, they played a national schedule. So they even played, I flew over to Allentown, Pennsylvania to watch Bronny versus DeJuan Wagner Jr. DeJuan Wagner was arguably the best high school basketball player of all time versus...
If I remember correctly, he scored 100, right?
100 points.
That'll do it.
So he has a son who played at Camden as well, who is very talented. He's going to Kentucky this year. Where they faced off. That was an incredible game that I got to lead on. I was the lead editor on site for Geico Nationals, where the elite of the elite programs play for a national title over here in Fort Myers. That's another great experience that I've had with ESPN, and really just kind of, being able to cover the elite athlete pretty much on a weekly basis was a incredible experience.
And was this covering them behind the scenes, like practice and stuff, or mostly games?
There was a little bit of behind the scenes and at practice work. Most of my skill set, or most of what I did, was all live segments. So if you ever saw a broadcast clip or a Bronny James clip being posted immediately upon them playing, that was likely me.
And then do you feel like the top players that you've seen in high school, they understand the importance of work ethic and
about it? I mean, there's been a couple, bad apples, sour apples. For the most part, the elite athlete understands the sacrifice and commitment you're making to the sport, where 99% of your life is focused to your craft and, bettering your opportunity to play at the next level and ultimately being the best version of yourself that you could be. I think every kid has that dream of being the best at the sport they choose. So being able to fulfill or at least go through the dream, fulfill most of it, and get to that point, you've made that commitment and understand kind of what goes into it in order to be that version of yourself.
And then for parents watching this, do you have any recommendations? Let's say kids now in high school and they're in love, they love basketball. What would you say are some things that maybe some requirements that okay, this is what needs to happen to get a college scholarship, and or just some things to look at, whether it's what type of program do we go to? What are some variables, factors in your experience that you've seen? It's
a really good question because it can go many different ways. I think it's important first to be realistic with your athlete. Everyone thinks that their kid is great. And chances are sometimes you're right. Your kid is that 1%. For the most part, your athlete isn't that 1%. And I say that with a grain of salt because you can be great at your sport and still not be that 1%. But I do think a couple things that will better your chances at the high school level to playing at the next level, obviously a trainer. I know we spoke about it in middle school not being as important, but at the high school levels, the game is more skilled than it ever has been. So, in order to be able to compete with that level of talent or athlete, you're going to have to be putting in a lot of skill work. I mean, you have 7-foot centers who can put the ball on the floor now and can shoot the three religiously and, the game is completely different. So if you're not working on skill development pretty much every day, something that you need to do, whether it's by yourself or with a trainer, make sure you have some type of tape. The elite athlete is going to be known about and spoke about among college programs and among college scouts and coaches. But for the athlete that's not getting the necessary exposure, having your own home footage of that game or of your game is important. The coach or the scout that's going to be watching the tape is more concerned about actual gameplay than the music, than how the video is edited aesthetically. Where a lot of people don't understand, like the mixtapes that you often see online, they're great, they're cool, and they're fantastic for marketing your athlete, but when it comes to breaking down, skill set and being able to see how that athlete can translate to your scheme and your program, less edited the better.
Okay.
Pretty much, just the compiled best clips that he wants to show off, or the full, hour and a half game tape. Yeah. Those are the most two important, I guess, hard assets to have to increase your recruiting chances. And then another big thing that you need to have is a platform to play on.
I was going to ask that. Yeah, like what determines exposure? What do you think are the different things that determine exposure?
So this is where things get a little interesting. In high school, if you're not playing with a U team that is providing exposure, or at least pushing you to play in events that have that kind of exposure, then you're probably not playing on the right kind of team. Okay. The big event names like Made Hoops, On the Radar Hoops with Shun Williams, EYBL, Adidas, Three Stripes now used to be called Gauntlet, and then you have the Under Armour circuit as well. Like, obviously the shoe brands are the elite of the elite. That is your 1%. If you're playing on one of those shoe brand teams in one of their leagues, chances are you can play college basketball. But for your average athlete, you're not always playing on that shoe brand, which is totally cool. There's been several NBA players to not play on a shoe brand team, John Morant being one of them. But definitely playing on a team that's going to get you to some of those high level events with big event companies like the ones I mentioned, where they're able to play against good competition, where there's going to be a streaming service like Baller TV there where you can stream the games, where if your student athlete does have a good game, where you can purchase the footage to kind of build a portfolio to pitch your student athlete to colleges, because that plays a little bit of a role when your student athlete isn't at the level where he's for sure Division I athlete, but he's on the cusp and he's just not getting recruited, or coaches aren't reaching out to him. The footage with the portfolio and him mailing it to coaches, or him sending it via Twitter or Instagram to college programs, that is important.
And do you feel like that's effective?
Oh, it works. I know several kids, especially down here, and since we're a very under-recruited area, there's been several kids who will send out game tape, or who will network with their coach and ask for their coaching network, like, who do you think I could send this to? And it's just kind of cold calling, where the athlete kind of just puts himself out there, like, hey, coach, this is me, and these are my grades, and here's some footage, and would be an honor to play for your program. Like that happens often, especially Division III, some Division II programs, and the JUCO level. That's a lot of recruitment happens through word of mouth because of social media and the exposure that it helps bring the student athlete.
And then how much does the actual high school team in 2023, 2024, do you feel like? Does
it play a role?
Yeah.
I do think AU plays a little more of a role because of the recruitment period. In the summer, you have a bunch of live periods where the coaches are allowed to watch you, allowed to call you, and allowed to show up at your games. Mm-hmm. That's not to say that high school isn't as important. Your accolades are important. The team you play on is important. Chances are maybe the team you're playing on is going to play a national schedule where you'll play the elite talent that'll help increase your name and increase your skill set and your exposure. But it does play a role. Don't think it's as important as AAU, but it could, it's still important to win states. It's still important to play in front of a coach who's going to come see you during your high school season.
Yeah, I think that's a great point too, because AU, I think, has gotten, it sounds like, potentially a bad rap in terms of, well, now that's more important than high school, but you're saying that might just be a logistics thing because there's more live periods in the summer where coaches can actually go there compared to the winter.
It does. It definitely plays a role. I mean, and like I said, during high school, you have your recruiting periods where coaches are allowed to come watch you at your game.
Mm-hmm.
It's where you'll see like Kalahari, go watch. You'll see videos, around the internet of Kalahari, in October, whenever the live period, whenever that window is open,
Mm-hmm.
Watching a kid at his high school and the video goes viral, it's important. High school is just as important, but the recruiting period is more open during the summer and spring, so you just have more eyes on you, therefore making it a little easier to be recruited.
Yeah. Okay. So if I'm following you correctly, you believe middle school is skills are important, but more important is just to let the kid kind of lead and let the kid be the kid.
Yeah. Fall in love with the game. If you want your kid to be that 1% in middle school, then you're going to have to do the pro schedule where they're waking up, they're working out pretty much throughout the entire day, and they're doing skill work.
And in your experience and in your perspective, that being that 1% in middle school does not necessarily translate to being that 1% at 17, 18, 19, 20 and what you've seen.
100%. Perfect example, Imani Bates was, They put him on, he was the number one player in his class. I forget what year. This was maybe 4 or 5 years ago. From the moment he was in the limelight, so from 8th grade till his senior year, he was arguably the number one player in the class. He was very skilled. You know what, let me give a better example because he just got drafted, so that doesn't count as much. There was a kid when I lived in Houston, Griggs, I forget, his younger brother just got drafted too or just signed or whatever. I won't name drop.
Yeah, top middle school. He was
There was a top middle school kid, and it happens often now, where there's kids at the middle school level now with hundreds of thousands of followers, where everyone's calling them the next LeBron or the number one player in middle school or 7th, 8th grade class, where they're great then, but when they get into high school, obviously the age gap is everyone's the same age, but bodies have started to settle in. You may have been the number one player in 8th grade at 6'3", but now everyone that you're competing against is 6'3", and some of those athletes are actually taller and stronger. And then some of these guys actually did more skill workout this year than you did. Where it's like the gap between skill and then obviously body type there's not as much of a gap. Where if you're taking it seriously, especially in high school, it's your job.
And then going into high school, ideally you want to be looking at the AAU program. You want to look at the AAU program on whether or not it's at a level where it's going to these events where the players on the team are getting exposure. And then is there anything else to potentially look at in terms of the coach, in terms of you've gone to hundreds if not thousands of these games that you see like stood out in terms of organization and like, okay, this is the right way to do things compared to...
I think that's, especially at the youth level, I think coaching at every level plays such a huge role where...
What I would want to ask is, okay, what's maybe the criteria that you think for a good high school U coach? What are maybe some of those check boxes that people could check?
We'll start with high school. I think with high school, obviously a system that you want to play in and someone you want to learn from. This person's going to be teaching you the game, but also going to be teaching you how to be a man. But it's about picking a coach that you want to play for, that you're going to buy into the system. There's another variable in the equation where you pick coaches based on their network, where that they have relationship with college coaches, so they're going to pick up the phone and vouch for you and call for you. That plays a little bit of a role that not a lot of people speak about when it comes to choosing your high school coach.
So maybe you want to talk with parents of players who have gone through them?
Yeah, you want to see the athletes he's coached, where they've ended up. That because it oftentimes, especially here in South Florida, since we're so under-recruited, coaches are calling their coaching network. Like, hey, I've got a 6'3" point guard, great kid, good academically, who needs an opportunity. These are the programs that have showed of interest. This program is offered. Here's his tape. Like, that often does help. So making sure you pick a coach who has a background, at least with college coaches, that plays a little bit of a role in, like I said, the system and playing for someone that you that you enjoy playing for. I think those are important variables when picking high school programs.
And then I think I want to add to that too in terms of who their staff is, because a lot of these organizations are pretty good size, right? Which will have multiple teams. So there might be this one guy who has some credibility and he leads it, but because of that, his organization's gotten big and he hasn't been able to effectively recruit,
100%.
a staff.
You were just at Montverde, and I mean, they arguably have one of the best staffs in the country, where they're getting guys who could be, head coaches pretty much anywhere at any level, and they're building staff to increase, the probability of their student athlete ending up in the NBA, getting the best out of their program.
And those staff members potentially would spend a lot more time with your child, potentially, rather than the head guy.
That is the truth.
Yeah.
A lot of the time, especially at college level, some athletes are picking schools where they have a good relationship with the offensive coordinator, or, just speaking on football or basketball, where let's just say they have you develop a relationship with the head coach at Texas A&M. He loses his job. He takes an assistant job at a different, high major Division I program, and because he was recruiting you at Texas A&M, he now has a relationship with you at Auburn, and now he's recruiting you to play at Auburn. So the athlete chooses Auburn. He's going because he enjoyed the visit and he enjoys the program, but probably because of his relationship with the coach as well.
And then multiple sports in high school. Do you have a take on that?
I think there's kids that can do it, and there's certain sports that are beneficial.
Yeah.
But realistically, if you're trying to be that 1%, you have to pick a sport. Yeah. There's not many athletes who are able to pick one and excel in both of them, or, in the one that they want to excel in the most.
Yeah, I think for sure for basketball. Football, I think potentially. Basketball, I think a lot of coaches, I know a lot of coaches, they'll go to the guy's basketball games because they want to see how he moves.
It's the truth.
Yeah, in terms of athletically. But basketball, I think with the AAU scene, if that is something that the kid commits to, I think you're right.
Yeah, I mean, great example, just recent, saw this kid play maybe 2-3 years ago, Keon Coleman. I want to say he's a Louisiana kid that plays football and basketball at Michigan State. He's a great basketball player, but he's a phenomenal football player. I think he plays safety and receiver at Michigan State, and was able to also play on the basketball team, where there's not many athletes that are that gifted.
Yeah.
But he was able to excel in both, plays on both the basketball and football team at Michigan State, although his priority sport is football. And
then nutrition, sleep, recovery at the elite levels, is that something that's talked about very much in terms of what you've seen in high school? Not really yet?
Well, it's funny. When you're going to these elite camps, it's spoken about quite a bit.
Okay.
You have instructors who are kind of explaining what the day-to-day is. Here, I'll give an example of a Made Hoops camp. There would be stations. So this one segment of camp where kids are going around different stations, and typically one of the stations is about social media marketing and how to market yourself properly as a student athlete, and the other one being like a recovery and wealth management, health management segment, where they're learning from someone who comes in to speak about mental health, to speak about nutrition, and to speak about rehabbing and resting, which is something that an athlete often has trouble doing, especially the younger they are. They don't understand that rehabbing, resting, icing, like all that stuff is very important, as you know.
Yeah, God bless Jared McCain, because his personal experience, because my two boys really enjoy it. He has a documentary stuff. And he was doing all the stuff that I was like, man, we should read this book, man, we should try this, do this. And they're like, whatever, it goes one ear out the other. But it's like, once Jared McCain does it.
Once it's related.
Yeah, and, hey, man, I'll take it. It's all good. So God bless him. Okay, so picking the right AAU program in terms of exposure, and then with the coach, looking at who's gone through the program and, where they've ended up and how much the coach is going to
I want to dive in on the AAU.
Okay, yeah.
Just seeing how the space kind of works and seeing how involved some fathers are, some on the more radical side. when you're picking an AU team, it doesn't always have to be the shoe brands. I think everyone wants to play for a shoe brand because they think that's the elite of the elite and going to increase their opportunity. There are several other travel programs that play in the hoop groups, that play in on the radars and the marquee hoops and the made hoops, where if your athlete is good, he's going to get attention. If you can play basketball, someone is going to find you. I can swear by that. But the culture in the AU scene is everyone wants to play for the shoe leagues or the shoe teams, thinking that's going to better your chances, where oftentimes your athlete may not be as good as them, but you're going to force them into a situation and it's actually going to do worse for their
skill
development, for their mental.
Psychic,
yeah, that's another, that's something that doesn't get spoken about often. Part of basketball is confidence. And, if someone's taken away your confidence, the way you play and the way other people see you play is going to, it's going to be not the same.
Yeah.
It'll definitely hinder, you'll be able to see the digression in your game. Making sure that you fit on those teams. You may not be like the other kids, or you may not fit well in the system, or you may not be okay with playing just 2 minutes a game, which happens often with those elite U teams where you have the starting 5 and then they'll rotate 1 or 2 guys in, for 10, 15 minutes, and then there's the 3 guys on the bench that aren't going to play much. Are you going to be okay with being a good teammate?
And then so you compare that with other EU programs who are paying, playing 10, 12, they're playing everybody?
Yeah, or at least, here, I'll give an example. So that 8th player on the bench for a shoe team, very impressive. Definitely a college Division I athlete. Which level, who knows? We'll just say low major or mid minus right now. Let's just say, you put him on a shoe team, the other kids are high major, he's good enough to play with them, but it's not going to get a bunch of opportunity. It might make sense to put him on, I'll use an example just because we're Miami triple threat. My buddy runs the program. He plays in all the hoop group stuff, all the marquee hoop stuff, and all the made hoop stuff, where there's going to be college.
So check marks.
Yeah, which are high-level events, high-level event companies, where they're getting college coaches to come in and watch. So they're going to events where there's anywhere from 10 to 100 college coaches on the sideline watching your student athlete. Or, they're also, on top of the coaches being there, you have the games being recorded. You have your athlete, if he has a good game, is being promoted on their social media platform, whether it's video, graphic, whatever it may be. That's the exposure that you're looking for with an AU program. So you don't always have to go to the shoe teams to get the exposure needed to increase your chances.
I think that's super, super valuable, because in terms of like the skill development piece, which at the end of the day, it's like what's most important. It's not, not where these kids end up. It's like who they become. So when you look at how are they spending their day-to-day, if they're on the end of the bench of one of these shoe teams, where that means they're probably not getting that much attention in practice because the coaches are putting the attention to the guys that are playing in the games. They're definitely not getting attention on game days, and that's going to, like you said, it's going to impact their mental and how they're thinking about things, and then also just in terms of their actual skill development and getting better and becoming as good as they can be. So I think that requires more effort potentially on the parent, right? Because you got to find the right fit.
Absolutely.
But I think it's the right fit is not, like, I think you just made a great point. It's not necessarily something that just has the Nike swoosh on it. The right fit is the fit with where your
100%.
kid is. So you got to be able to look at where your kid is realistically.
Well, look, even that 1% oftentimes chooses not to play on the shoe circuit. So right off the top of my head, I can give you 3 athletes that were drafted in the top 10 that didn't play for shoe brand teams. Not Nike, not Adidas, and not Under Armour. It's Eamon and Alcer Thompson, the twins that were just drafted within the top 5. They played for a Florida pro, Marcus McGee. It's an independent team here in Florida. They were lottery picks. In fact, top 5 picks in the NBA draft played for a team that wasn't a shoe brand. And their teammate, who was also drafted top 10, Taylor Hendricks, was also on that team, which was a independent AAU team with talent that is playing in the NBA. So the rhetoric that the only way that you can play in the NBA is if you play on one of these shoe teams that's false. And those 3 kids proved it. And there's been many other instances where you have elite athletes who aren't playing on shoe teams. Marcus Garrett who went to Kansas, who played a year or two with the Miami Heat. He didn't play with a shoe team, and he ended up making it to the NBA. So it's one of those, things where everyone wants to play on the shoe team because they think it's going to better their chances, and oftentimes it may not, depending on the circumstance or the scenario. If they're going to post anything to market themselves, obviously appropriate content that's going to push their brand. It's crazy to call your student athlete a brand, but that's essentially what you're building is, you're building your social media is a platform where you're pushing your student athlete.
And then there's the good mixtapes on there, which can hit in terms of at least getting eyes on your account.
It's a conversation piece.
But you also potentially want to have a combination with stuff that actually coaches can get value from as well.
That's way more important. Yeah. Specifically at the high school level, just because for the athlete that's not getting recruited, it's crazy how much of a tool your home footage will be. And then, of course, at the middle school level, it definitely helps. But, film isn't as important.
And then how big has post-grad become over the last few years?
It's become very big.
If you could break that down a little bit.
Yeah, no. So essentially, it's a 5th year of high school for a student athlete that needs to get their grades right in order to be accepted into a 4-year program or even a 2-year JUCO program, or for a student athlete that wants to take a year to better their game, their skill set. Those are typically the 2 reasons why someone chooses postgrad.
And do you like that option for those who potentially don't have that?
I think it's great.
Don't many options after high school in terms of playing.
I think it's great. I am a JUCO guy. I think if you have the opportunity to play in JUCO, I think that's what you do. But if you end up doing if you end up not getting a JUCO offer, I think a post-grad year is very beneficial. Yeah. Like I said, you can improve your grades and your GPA, which will improve the likelihood of, receiving a scholarship or some financial help. And then, also gives you that 1 year to better your skill set. And then this is the way basketball is the number one for my 2 boys right now. And the way I look at it is I'm a big process guy, and I like having missions. I think that it just makes life. Absolutely. It's exciting. Yeah, it makes it more exciting, makes it more meaningful. Have you ever heard of the movie Turner and Hooch? Of course. Okay. So we have a French this is an example of how crazy I get on this stuff. But there's a dog. The dog in Turner and Hooch is a French Mastiff. Our dog's a French Mastiff. So the mission for him is you got to beat Hooch in terms of age, because that dog lived till he was 14, and these dogs don't live that long usually. But just like as an example. But I say that there is that, okay, so that's the mission right now, and then wherever it lies, and then whatever happens, it happens, when I say that. And then if it doesn't work out with basketball, which at some point, no matter what happens, that road's going to end. All right, so what's the next thing? Right. Do you have any thoughts in terms of what you've seen in the last 5-6 years in the youth basketball scene for kids 16, 17, 18 in terms of setting themselves up beyond basketball, what they should be doing, and or when basketball ends for them, what can they do to stay motivated and find, I think this is a great question, because I think the vehicle of basketball and youth sports in general, what it does for a child is just unbelievable. Instills, morals, instills accountability, instills responsibilities, a bunch of, traits that you need the rest of your life. Where I think, beyond the game, let's just say high school was it. That's the end of someone's career. What they've learned, their entire childhood, specifically in high school basketball, what they've learned in those 3-4 years of playing will absolutely be, used in their personal lives and in experiences that they're going to be dealing with in the future. I myself have learned so much from the game that I've applied to my personal life, attitude, responsibility, accountability. Those are things that I've learned through the vehicle of basketball, specifically youth sports, where I still use it. I'm in my 30s and I still see myself using, a lot of the things that I've learned from my time playing sports in my adult life, which is just unbelievable how, a sport can shape an individual. Yeah, I think the big
I don't hear it as much now, but at least growing up for me, it was this idea of don't put too much emphasis into sports just because the percentages are so low of actually making it professionally, where I think the gap was there. I think that could be flipped, and it's a demonstration of what it takes to be successful in whatever it is that you want to be successful in. And then just my big thing on that is, okay, it's not going to happen here for you. What's the next thing? And then you can apply all the time, the film study and taking care of your body and the hard work and all these things. You can apply that to the new thing, and you're just keep moving forward.
Absolutely.
Cool. Well, I think that's a great way to end, John. I really appreciate you. I think this is super valuable for our audience. Do you have any personal social media that you'd like to share where people can reach out to you? Or
yeah, sure. My personal is it's JONEISENMAN _. It's Jon Eisenman _. It's where you can find me. Feel free to reach out, and if you have any questions, I'm looking forward to answering them.
That's awesome. It's been an absolute pleasure. And
Likewise.
I know you probably had some stuff go viral over the last 5-6 years.
I have. The one I speak about quite a bit is all the USA basketball one-on-ones. So like the Jason Tatum versus Bam Adebayo, and then like the Kevin Durant versus Russell Westbrook and Donovan Mitchell. Those clips were all mine.
Yeah.
And when I tell people that, it's usually a conversation starter.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. Cool. Well, appreciate you, John.
Appreciate
Absolute pleasure. And we'll see you at the next. Make sure you guys follow, subscribe. The more subscribers we get, the more support we have for Super Athlete Radio. And then leave us a review if you like. Thank you very much. Cool, man.
I appreciate you.
You killed it. Hey, if you made it this far, you made it to the end of our episode today. And I want to say I appreciate you very much, because I know how many different listening and learning options you have out there. It means a lot to us. If you could do us a favor and leave a 5-star review on Spotify and or iTunes, that would be super helpful in terms of expanding our reach and helping more people take control of their health, performance, mindset, and longevity. And if for some reason you have any questions or concerns about what you heard in this episode, feel free to reach out so we can get those solved. For us, it's all about incremental improvements every episode, every day, and we challenge you to do the same. Let's get better today.